Well, ladies and gentlemen, I must say that for once, I actually enjoyed reading the news today because actually it was just funny. It was just funny. So let's actually get straight into the news. And the first news story is actually around Keir Starmer. For those of you who don't know, Keir Starmer in the United Kingdom is currently the most hated, most undervalued, most nobody likes him prime minister that they've ever had in Britain. Like, the guy is just seriously hated. Now, one of the reasons that he is as hated as he is because he appears to have basically broken every single one of his election pledges, from deporting foreign migrants to he's not going to raise taxes. And he's raised taxes quite a few times. Now, his own backbenchers are now rebelling against him, and many of them are talking about a way to potentially fire him from his position. And he has now warned that if his own backbenchers turn against him, this will trigger a general election. It's kind of like a threat of, you don't want to rebel against me, because if you do, we'll have a general election and reform will win. By all imaginations, the current polling shows that reform will be successful. Do let me know what you think of that in the comments section below. But before I move on to the next South African news stories of today, can I yet again remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. It really does help. Please just share this video around your friends and help this video go viral. So let's move on to the next news story. And this is that the South African government, I swear, they must have got themselves a new social media person. It's the only way to explain it. Well, they are releasing posts that basically say South Africa is calling on individuals to reject racist behavior, language, or attitudes, and to foster unity and mutual respect in all spaces, because they're effectively running this Say No to Racism campaign. But the problem is that what this is effectively doing is highlighting just how many racial laws there are in South Africa. Now, the South African government then responded to say that actually the South African Constitution doesn't allow discrimination based on race, sex, religion, or other grounds, and they used a justification underneath the Promotion of Equality and the Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act, which enhances equality in all spheres of life. Now, this isn't having the reaction to the public that the government claims that they thought they would have, because many individuals are saying, yes, we agree with all of this. So why exactly have you got race-based legislation in the form such as, and this is only one example, we could use the example of the BEE disclosures that many companies have to give, as well as the Equity Amendment Act, which basically gives specific racial targets for each company to adopt. Now, the South African government says that they want to set the record straight that during apartheid, hundreds of race-based laws existed. After 1994, all discriminatory laws were appealed. And today, South Africa's legal framework is non-racial and equality-focused. It's not the case. It's actually a flat-out lie, because currently there are numerous forms of sectoral targets. Remember, that's what the current Amendment Act seeks to impose, sectoral targets based on gender, disability, and race. So apparently these were all repealed, but they're all there because there are still 100 and something laws still in place that effectively give forms of racial legislation. Now, Ramaphosa himself, when addressed by the Freedom Front Plus, that asked, when will we be dropping these classifications? He himself said in an address, well, not until South Africa is equal. So the president has identified and accepted that these laws exist, but the South African government on Twitter, nope. Apparently we're a non-sexist and non-racist country. If only somebody could tell Grok and ChatGPT and all the other AI, because all of those AIs are currently noticing the scale of the misinformation being pushed out by the government. Now, you may be looking at all of that and asking yourself a fundamental question, and that is, well, why exactly is this all occurring? Why is the government going through to such great lengths to try to point out that it's not racist, even though it is? And the answer is actually very easy to understand, and it is the G20, and specifically the attention being drawn to the race-based legislation by such organizations as Solidarity. Now, moving on to the G20, I've got to remind you that the G20 is due to meet on the 22nd to the 23rd of November in Johannesburg. But you see, they've had a problem because, as you'll know, Donald Trump said he's not attending, which effectively now means that it's going to be the G19. Well, unfortunately, news is out that Vladimir Putin of Russia will also not be attending, basically because of the international arrest warrant against him based on the ICJ case. However, Mexico's president and Argentina's Milei has now said that they will also not be attending. So effectively, we've now gone from the G20 to the G16. And hold your thoughts because we're going to update that in a second. Now, you will remember that the reason that Donald Trump said that he was not going to be attending was because he claimed on Truth Social that Afrikaners are being killed, farms are being illegally confiscated, and he said that hosting the G20 in South Africa is, and I quote, disgraceful. Now, in my video yesterday, I did talk about Paul Mashatile's continued reaffirmation on EWC relating to farms, so effectively, that's not wrong, even though the South African government says, well, it is, but it's not. Now, the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, also echoed Trump's suggestions and accused the South African government of violent racial discrimination. Now that will be why we're seeing all of the BEE bull rubbish. Now, Argentina's President Milei, a Trump ally, has also followed after Trump and cancelled his trip. Instead, Argentina will be sending their foreign minister. Now, many analysts are warning that Milei is risking Argentina standing in the G20 by appearing to, well, just follow the US's political moves. But I'm not actually sure I agree with them. And again, we will talk about that in a minute. Now, in response to Trump withdrawing, you will remember that the South African government insisted that the summit remains successful and beautiful. I don't know why they always use such strange language. It's really bizarre because nobody talks like that. In any case, diplomats have downplayed the snubs of these four individuals now, claiming that heads of states regularly skip summits. And they suggest that the attendance for the rest of the G20 remains very strong. But behind scenes, Pretoria is repeatedly caught off guard, particularly by the US and Argentina. They frequently are like, well, they're shocked. Now, you will recall that Cyril Ramaphosa publicly dismissed Trump's boycott, saying that boycotts politics don't work. And he claims that the US is isolating itself and losing out by not attending. But if boycotts politics don't work, why is Ramaphosa boycotting Israel? It's amazing how that happens, right? But other South African political leaders have been more blunt, with some suggesting that Trump is not the alpha and omega. Well, I'm sure you can guess who that is, Secretary General of the ANC. And the government says that the summit's success doesn't depend on a single country, not even the US. Now, South Africa maintains that it's already working with US Vice President J.D. Vance on the G20 handover matters, despite Trump's order to the contrary. So this got me thinking. Trump says that South Africa shouldn't be hosting the G20 because, and I quote, he said that it was disgraceful, and why is South Africa still even in the G20? Now, for those of you who don't know, the G20 is made up of the major world economies. The idea is that this is 20 countries that, when combined, equate to 85% of global GDP. Now, what they effectively do is they meet and they suggest policy. It's not binding laws, but it's policy, and it's things that they're all going to do together as a form of political symbolism, that they will all be working towards a similar objective. It's pretty much the UN type stuff. And it's always framed as a form of global economic governance. So having people not show up does damage the forum's credibility and unity and ability to have this kind of collective consensus on policy going forward. Now, the countries that attended are Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Canada, China, France, India, Germany, Indonesia, Italy, Japan, Mexico, Russia, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, South Korea, Turkey, the UK, the US, the EU, and the African Union. So, South Africa, let's actually look at this. Where do we fit? Well, if I look at position 19 of 20, That position is occupied by Saudi Arabia, who has a GDP of 1.24 trillion. Now that's position 19. As I'm sure you can guess, South Africa occupies position 20. We are the smallest of the G20 countries with a GDP of 426 billion. So we are like 3 times smaller than position 19. So with that being said, you had to ask yourself a question of, well, if South Africa is so small and insignificant, why is it even involved in the G20? Now, for those of you who don't know, the G20 actually originally started out as the G7, but was expanded into the G20. And the idea was having this broader global forum after the Asian financial crisis, where leaders wanted to have at least one African member. So South Africa was it, and it's still it, because it was the most industrialized, diversified, and globally integrated economy in Africa. Now, at the time it was included into the G20s around the late 1990s, early 2000s, South Africa had the biggest stock exchange in the global south, the most advanced banking system on the continent, a stable democracy post-apartheid, and strong diplomatic influences in the African Union and the UN. So it looked like the safest, most credible African representative. Effectively, the idea of including South Africa was that it would act as a form of diplomatic bridge country. Now, the idea was that it had very close ties with the West, that's the EU, the UK, and the US, and BRICS countries, China, Russia, India, Brazil, and other non-aligned world players. So South Africa was seen as a valuable connector. But over time, South Africa has damaged that reputation by alienating the West and siding firmly with non-aligned members, like Iran, that non-aligned country, and BRICS nations. So it is no longer a connector. Now, South Africa keeps trying to act as a connector by wanting to insert itself into regional disputes around the world. Like it said, it would somehow mediate the dispute between Russia and Ukraine, even though they did nothing. South Africa still wants to try to be the connector, even though nobody wants it to connect nothing. The other problem is also that South Africa is no longer an economic powerhouse. Because of all the corruption with the ANC, what we've effectively seen is that the economy in South Africa hasn't grown, whilst everybody else's economy, has. So our economy is still small. In fact, it's actually smaller now than it was at the time that South Africa joined the G20, purely because of inflation. So why is South Africa still there? Well, that's actually a very good question. And there is the possibility, I suppose, that in the near future, South Africa could find itself no longer on the G20. But it's important to understand that you can't just remove a country from the G20 because there's no formal mechanism for expulsion or replacement. And it's not like there's a term where they just serve on there for a period. What would have to happen is that there would have to be some form of overwhelming political consensus. And that would be very difficult to achieve because remember, there's no real terms of memorandum. Now, it's important to understand that the G20 has no constitution, no membership criteria, no voting system, and no process of removal. So South Africa could be there for a long time, but to be honest, all the members could just say, look, we need a replacement and we need somebody who's more relevant. And so you would have to ask yourself the question, as in, well, who exactly would be more relevant? Well, the possible replacements are Nigeria, who has the largest GDP in Africa, also a very huge population. Could be Egypt, though Egypt does consider itself more to be a Middle Eastern country rather than an African country. Ethiopia, with a big population, also has the African Union headquarters, and Kenya, which is East Africa's tech and financial hub. But the most pragmatic answer is probably Nigeria. But for now, South Africa's position remains stable because of China and Russia, who continue to support it. Now, the African Union does have a permanent seat at the G20, and the African Union for now continues to back South Africa. But with many African countries turning against South Africa, it's only a matter of time before, they question South Africa's legitimacy and credibility of actually being in that position. Now, let's get on to the big news, and that is, well, the G16, as we just said, is now down to the G15 because the biggest news has occurred, and that is that China's president, Xi Jinping, is pulling out of the South African summit. Instead, they are sending a premier. Now, this is adding to the growing list of global leaders skipping the event, which, as you know, includes Trump. Now, Xi's withdrawal is actually officially unexplained, but fits his recent pattern of home court diplomacy, preferring to host leaders in Beijing rather than travel. Now, China still publicly supports South Africa's G20 leadership, but his absence does mean that the summit now lacks the leaders of the world's two largest economies, plus Russia, and it's a devastating symbolic blow to the G20. So remember, they said it was all going ahead. Didn't matter if Trump withdrew. Who cares? They still had all the other leaders. Well, they kind of don't. The world's two largest economies, America and China, not there. One of your biggest allies in Russia, not there. Mexico, withdrawn because they just don't like you. It's not looking good now, is it? Now, overall, what this does show is that the G20 is looking to be a hollowed out summit, with South Africa increasingly being isolated and diplomatically weakened. Now, this is all showing that South Africa as a whole is struggling to command any form of global political respect. So they're gathering the leaders here to demonstrate their form of global importance. Nobody's going. That's what Cyril's legacy is going to be now. A failed state and a G20 that no one attended to. Kind of like he might as well be singing all by myself, because that's what he's going to be, a G20 with no leaders. Anyway, that's the news of today. Let me know what you think of it in the comment section below. And until next time, bye.